Dodger Stadium, 60,000 people packed into one of the most iconic venues in American sports. A one-run game, fifth inning, 2 runners on base, and a slow-burning tension that had been building since the first pitch of the night, one that was about to detonate in a way nobody in that stadium and nobody watching at home could have predicted. This is not a story about a balk call, that was just the match. This is the story of what happened after it, and why the baseball world has not stopped talking about it since. Long before the fifth inning arrived, both dugouts were already on edge. Pitchers on both sides had been working inside aggressively all night, testing hitters with fastballs that lived just off the black. There had already been 2 separate dugout disputes over pitch framing in the earlier innings, small confrontations that never fully resolved, just got pushed down and buried. Kind of tension that doesn't go away. It waits. The San Francisco Giants and the Los Angeles Dodgers were locked in the kind of game that demands total concentration from everyone on the field. 1 run separated these 2 teams, and every pitch carried the weight of the entire series behind it. Both benches were watching. Both benches were looking for a spark or a reason to light one themselves. The atmosphere inside Dodger Stadium was exactly what you would expect from a rivalry of this magnitude. 60,000 voices, rising and falling with every count, every swing, every inch of movement on the mound. And on that mound was Shohei Ohtani. On this particular night, Ohtani's velocity and movement were sharp. His fastball had its typical carry and his splitter was dropping out of the zone at the right moments. But there was a subtle mechanical inconsistency affecting his rhythm, something small, barely visible, the kind of thing only a trained eye would catch. It was enough to disrupt the flow of his delivery at key moments, and in a one-run game, small disruptions matter enormously. Now step into the batter's box and think about who is standing there against him. Luis Arraez is statistically one of the most difficult hitters in baseball to retire. He is an elite contact hitter who does not chase pitches out of the zone and does not panic in long at-bats. His patience at the plate is not a personality trait, it is a weapon. Against a power pitcher like Ohtani, that patience becomes outright dangerous. Every pitch Arraez lays off is a pitch he forces Ohtani to rethink. Every foul ball he fights off is another moment of pressure added to an already pressurized situation. The at-bat that followed was a long, grinding battle. Pitch by pitch, count by count, Arraez worked deeper into the at-bat. Ohtani responded with adjustments of his own. The crowd was watching every movement, and then the count reached full. 3 balls, 2 strikes. Everything hanging in the air. The next pitch would decide the at-bat, and that is the moment the umpire stepped in. The home plate umpire raised his arm and called a balk. What followed in the next 10 seconds set everything that came after it in motion. The Dodgers' dugout erupted immediately. Manager Dave Roberts was out of the dugout and charging toward home plate before the umpire had even finished signaling. 60,000 fans roared in disbelief and fury, the kind of crowd reaction that physically vibrates through a stadium. It was loud, it was immediate, and it was everywhere. But while Roberts and the Dodgers were focused on the umpire, something else was already happening on the mound. Something that had nothing to do with the umpire at all, because Luis Arraez was not walking toward the umpire. He was walking toward Shohei Ohtani. Arraez bypassed the umpire entirely and walked directly toward Ohtani on the mound. What happened next was physical, aggressive, and completely unexpected. Arraez grabbed Ohtani's glove, a direct, forceful act in a moment already soaked in tension. He pointed a finger directly in Ohtani's face. The broadcast microphones picked up the exchange. The words were angry, personal, and explosive. The stadium's reaction was not a roar, it was something past a roar. It was absolute detonation. This is important to understand. No player approaches an opposing pitcher on the mound and grabs his glove without knowing exactly what they are doing. This was not an accident. This was not a confused reaction to the chaos around them. Arraez made a deliberate choice to cross that space and confront Ohtani directly, and that choice changed everything about what this game became. The crowd at Dodger Stadium, which had been raging at the balk call moments before, now had something far more immediate to respond to. 60,000 people watching one player grab another player's glove and get directly in his face. The sound inside that stadium at that moment was unlike anything that had been heard all night. The Giants' bench cleared immediately. Their players were on the field before most people in the stadium had fully processed what had just happened at the mound. The Dodgers players flooded the field in response. Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Teoscar Hernandez, the entire roster was moving. Coaches from both sides were physically grabbing at their own players, trying to pull people back, trying to create space between bodies that were pressing closer together by the second. Giants manager was on the field. Dave Roberts was shouting at the umpiring crew. The umpires themselves were scrambling, moving between players, trying to keep the situation from crossing a line that once crossed could not be uncrossed. To paint the picture accurately, this was a baseball game that was moments away from one of the ugliest brawls in modern baseball history. The space between a heated confrontation and a full-scale incident is often measured in seconds, and right now those seconds were disappearing fast. Everything depended on what happened next on that mound. Shohei Ohtani stepped forward. It was instinctive, it was primal. It was the reaction of someone whose personal space had been violated in front of 60,000 people and millions watching at home. His teammates in the aftermath would describe his expression in the moment as something that went beyond anger, not anger, something colder. Controlled intensity that was in some ways more alarming than anger. He was not backing down. 2 umpires converged on the mound with remarkable speed. One grabbed Ohtani by the arm. One physically pushed Arraez back. The image of two umpires physically restraining Shohei Ohtani, one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet, shocked everyone watching in the stadium and on every broadcast around the world. The situation was at its peak. Everything in that stadium was pointing toward escalation. Arraez had been pushed back but was still on the field. Ohtani was being held by an umpire. Players from both teams were still on the grass. The coaching staffs were losing ground, and then Ohtani made a choice. He stopped, not because the umpire's grip forced him to. The umpire was still holding his arm, but anyone watching could see that Ohtani had already made a decision before the grip tightened. It was a deliberate, conscious decision, not a reluctant surrender to external force. He took a visible breath. His expression shifted from the cold, focused intensity that his teammates had described to something entirely different. Something that took 60,000 people a full moment to understand. He extended his hand toward Luis Arraez. What followed was half a second of pure silence from 60,000 people. That silence was real. It was the sound of an entire stadium processing something it had not expected to see. The roar that had been building for the last several minutes, the fury, the energy, the momentum toward something ugly stopped. Just stopped, and then the crowd erupted, not in anger, in shock. In admiration, in something that sounded like disbelief made audible. Arraez paused, and then he took the handshake that stopped a brawl, right there at the center of a field surrounded by players from two teams, coaches who had been shouting 30 seconds ago and umpires who had been physically restraining people. Two players shook hands. The mound cleared. Players from both sides returned to their dugouts. The umpires reset. The game continued. In the minutes that followed, the baseball world began to process what had just happened. Consider what was on the table had things gone differently. Suspensions, significant fines, a story that would have dominated coverage not just for the rest of this series but for weeks, a story that would have overshadowed everything else happening in baseball and overshadowed the careers of every player involved. The kind of incident that follows people. That is what the Balk call, the glove snatch, and Arraez's confrontation were pointing toward. The trajectory of that night was heading somewhere very specific. What actually happened instead was a defining moment of character, documented in real time, in front of 60,000 witnesses and broadcast to millions more. The record shows that Ohtani chose to de-escalate a situation he did not create, under conditions that would have led most people to do the opposite. At the post-game press conference, Ohtani, speaking through his interpreter, addressed what had happened on the mound directly. Winning the argument was never going to help us win the game, he said, and then, letting the moment consume me would have been the real loss. He spoke about his respect for the sport and for the fans, not in abstract terms but in the specific context of what had just happened. A specific moment, a specific decision, a specific outcome. Dave Roberts, speaking separately, offered his own assessment of what Ohtani had done, and of what Ohtani represents more broadly. He is not just the best player in baseball, he is the most important, Roberts said. That is a distinction Roberts was drawing deliberately. The best player in baseball is a statistical conversation. The most important player in baseball is something larger. It is about what a player means to the sport itself, to how the game is perceived, to the moments it produces. Walk through the chain of events one final time. A Balk call in the fifth inning of a one-run game. Luis Arraez bypassing the umpire and walking directly toward Ohtani. A glove grabbed, a finger pointed, 60,000 people detonating, both benches clearing, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Teoscar Hernandez on the field, two umpires physically restraining Shohei Ohtani. The entire baseball world watching the situation accelerate towards something nobody wanted to see. And then one player, one breath. One outstretched hand, half a second of silence from 60,000 people. Shohei Ohtani has, since his arrival in Major League Baseball, redefined what it means to be a complete player. His statistical profile as both a pitcher and a hitter is without precedent in the modern era. But statistics measure what happens between the lines. They do not measure what happens when the game stops being a game for a moment and becomes something rawer. What happened at Dodger Stadium on this night belongs to a different category than statistics. It is the kind of moment that attaches itself to a career permanently, not because it was the greatest athletic performance, but because it revealed something about the person performing. Greatness, as this moment demonstrated, is not limited to what a player does when everything is going well. It is what they do when everything is on fire. End of script. Estimated word count, ~2 600 words.